Today's lesson is designed to teach you the parts of a plant cell. So our learning target is, how do the structures in plant and animal cells relate to their functions? So let's review what we've already talked about in terms of cells. So last week, we learned about the animal cell, and we talked specifically about 5 organelles, or parts of the cell. We spoke about the cell membrane, the outer area of the cell. We spoke about the cytoplasm, all of that jelly-like stuff inside of the cell, the yellow stuff in this picture. We spoke about the nucleus. In this picture, it's purple right here. We talked about the nuclear membrane, the surrounding of the nucleus. And we also talked about the mitochondria, the power plants of the cell. So remember, the nucleus, the nuclear membrane, the outside of the nucleus. The cell membrane is all of the orange stuff that you can see in this cell drawing. Mitochondria kind of look like those squiggly jelly beans. And cytoplasm, the green jelly-like material. So today, we're going to add on 2 structures that are found in animal cells and learn about 2 organelles that only are found in plant cells. So we're going to talk about something called the endoplasmic reticulum, or ER, the vacuole, the cell wall, and chloroplasts. And perhaps in my picture on the right side of my screen, you can even see these structures within the plant cell. Here's my reminder. If you don't currently have a notebook in front of you, I'll ask for you to pause this video and go get a notebook. Anytime I recommend there's something on a slide that you write down, I'll have this picture of a notebook in the lower right-hand corner of my screen. So if you see this picture on a slide, I would recommend that you pause and write something down in your notebook. Okay. We're going to read just a small portion of the book today. Remember, I'm not an expert on cells, and sometimes the book presents information in a different way than I would, which is why I think it's valuable for us to spend our time doing this together. Okay, here we go. A plant structure is a little different from an animal cell structure. In addition to the cell membrane, a plant cell has a cell wall. The cell wall provides additional support and stability to a plant cell. Green plants also have organelles called chloroplasts. Chloroplasts absorb light and use it along with water and carbon dioxide to produce sugars for the cell. This whole process is called photosynthesis. There are some other organisms, such as algae, that also have chloroplasts and photosynthesize. Plant cells, like animal cells, have mitochondria that use oxygen and nutrients to produce energy. So on the right side of the screen, you can see a picture of a plant cell that shows the nucleus, chloroplasts, all of those little green ovals, mitochondria, these orange ovals, and vacuoles, which is something we'll learn about soon. So a cell wall was just introduced to us in that reading. The cell wall is only found in plant cells. Animal cells do not have a cell wall. You can see that it's outside of the cell membrane. So in this picture right here, we have our cell membrane, and then there's an additional layer outside of that, and that is the cell wall. The job of the cell wall is to provide support and protection outside the cell membrane. And this makes plants really strong because of these cell walls in their cells. Here's a picture of a plant cell underneath a microscope. So again, we can see each of these is a cell. Inside of this cell, we can't see too many structures at this magnification, but we can observe the cytoplasm, all of the jelly-like material inside of there. And we can also see the nucleus, these little blue blobs, the control center of the cells. and we can see the cell wall. We could also say that we could see the cell membrane. So again, if here is the cell wall, just inside of that would be the cell membrane. The next structure we're going to talk about is, again, only found in plant cells. This is one you might want to practice saying. It's pronounced chloroplast. Chloroplast. The chloroplast is the site of photosynthesis. This is how plants get energy. Photosynthesis uses light as a source of energy for producing sugars from carbon dioxide and water. Now that definition gets a little bit complicated. Here's what I want you to know. I want you to know that chloroplasts are where photosynthesis takes place. And I want you to know that photosynthesis is how plants get energy. They use the light to get energy. You might add a drawing to your notes of a chloroplast. In my opinion, it looks kind of like a jelly bean, but this time instead of a squiggle like the mitochondria, it kind of has like a spring shape inside of it, or little circles. So in my drawing, here's how, if I can get it in there we go. Here's how I chose to represent a chloroplast, kind of a jelly bean oval with some smaller circles inside. Again, chloroplasts only in plant cells. Here we have a picture of a cell under a microscope, and you can see lots of chloroplasts. All of these little green structures are the chloroplasts. We can also observe cytoplasm, that blue jelly-like material. And I also observe the cell wall, the outer layer of the cell. Another picture under some more intense magnification. We can see the nucleus, the chloroplasts here, the cell wall, and the cytoplasm. And this is a leaf that we're looking at under some pretty high magnification. Okay, the next structure I'd like to talk to you about is something called the vacuole. This is found in both animal and plant cells. Now that word vacuole kind of reminds me of the word vacuum, like you'd use to clean up your house, right? And actually, the purpose of a vacuole is really similar to the purpose of a vacuum. Vacuoles store substances and can help contribute to the breakdown of wastes. So vacuoles can help clean up the cell, okay, which is the purpose of a vacuum. Animal and plant cells have different size vacuoles. This right here would be an example of what a vacuole would look like in an animal cell. It's pretty small. In a plant cell, however, vacuoles are much larger. Think about why that might be. Why might plant cells need to store more substances? I bet you can figure that one out. So again, animal cells have several small vacuoles. They're used for storage, and they contain nutrients, water, or waste. Plant cells, on the other hand, have one large vacuole. They're used to store water, and they also help to keep the plant rigid. Okay. Now, in addition to helping clean up the cell, I also think that vacuoles are similar to a vacuum, because think about when you've been vacuuming for a while, you eventually have to clean out that tank, right, or the filter, the area that sucks up all the dust and hair and crumbs. And that's kind of what a vacuole does inside of the cell as well. It's holding all of that stuff. So take a look at some actual pictures of a cell. Here we have our animal cell, and we see lots of small vacuoles. You might also think, what other structures can I identify in this animal cell right now? Our plant cell vacuole looks a lot different. Check out how big this vacuole is in our plant cell. It takes up a lot of the cell. Plants have a lot of water that they need to store, which is why their vacuoles are so large. So let's do a small check for understanding. Right now, I have two cells on my screen. One is an animal cell and one is a plant cell. Take just a second and maybe consider pausing if you need some more time to think. Take just a second and identify which one is an animal cell and which one is a plant cell. If you identified the one on the left as a plant cell, you're correct. And let me tell you why. In the cell on the left, I see chloroplasts. Remember those jelly beans with the springs or circles inside of them? I also observe there's a cell wall, that outermost layer past the cell membrane. And last but not least, I observe that there's a large vacuole. Instead of having lots of little vacuoles, there's one big one. The shape of this cell is also a clue to me. The fact that it's more rectangular in shape versus more circular, like the animal cell is. There's one more organelle that I'd like to introduce to you today, and that is called the endoplasmic reticulum. That's definitely one you'd need to practice saying out loud right now. Endoplasmic reticulum. Now that's a mouthful, so sometimes we'll refer to it as the ER. That's a little easier to say and also spell. The purpose of the endoplasmic reticulum is to produce proteins and lipids, things that the cell needs. It may be smooth, so you might see things on drawings called the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, or it could be rough, the rough endoplasmic reticulum. The rough endoplasmic reticulum is covered with something called ribosomes. Now, that's not something that we'll talk about in class. However, if you're interested, there's a slide later on in this asynchronous work that has some information about what ribosomes are. Now, there's a really cool trick that I'm going to tell you for how to identify the endoplasmic reticulum. It's normally snuggled up right next to the nucleus. They're kind of BFFs. So you usually have the nucleus, and right next to that, you have the endoplasmic reticulum. And I'd love to show you a picture of that. So here in our cell diagram, we have our nucleus, and you can see snuggled up right next to our nucleus is our endoplasmic reticulum. Okay, and remember I said that there's a smooth one and a rough one? Well, here's an example of what a rough endoplasmic reticulum looks like. You can see all those little dots. And here's an example of what a smooth endoplasmic reticulum would look like. Perfect. Let's transition next to a check for understanding. So right now in your notebook, you might want to write down A, B, C, D, all the way down to H. And I'd recommend pausing this video and trying to see, can you identify all of the organelles that are currently on my screen? Can you label them? So go ahead and pause the video, and once you've figured this out, feel free to unpause because the next slide will have the answers. All right, sixth graders, I hope that you've done this thinking on your own because it won't do you a lot of good to just keep this video playing and just see the answers appear. I want you to actually think about it and try it out. Hopefully you finished that work and you're ready to check your answers. So let's see if you're right. Structure A was pointing to this right here, snuggled right up to the nucleus, which clued me in that this is the endoplasmic reticulum, or the ER. Structure B seems to be pointing to all of this light green stuff here. That jelly-like material is our cytoplasm. Structure C seems to be pointing to this right here. I notice it's a pretty large structure, which clued me into the fact that this is a vacuole. The next structure, structure D, seems to be pointing to this squiggly jelly bean. And we know that squiggly jelly beans are mitochondria. Structure E and F, those two go together. I notice they're both pointing to the outside of the cell. So what I'm going to think about is I know that the cell wall is the outermost layer of the cell. And I think the arrow that's pointing to that is arrow E. It's pointing to the outermost edge of the cell. So that means that that's showing our cell wall. The innermost layer then is pointing to our cell membrane. Only two structures left to label. They're both pointing to this blue circle right here. I see that this letter G is pointing to the outside of that, which shows me that it's the nuclear membrane, and then H should be labeled nucleus. How'd you do? Let's put this all together then in one last part. We're going to do a little bit of comparison between our animal cells and our plant cells, because we've now learned 9 different structures. We've learned cell membrane, cytoplasm, nucleus, nuclear membrane, mitochondria, endoplasmic reticulum, vacuole, cell wall, and chloroplasts. That's a lot of organelles that we've learned over the last 2 weeks. We know that some of them are found in animal cells and some of them are found in plant cells. So I'd recommend that you right now draw a Venn diagram in your notebook. Okay? I drew mine as 2 circles and I labeled one side animal cell and the other side plant cell. And we know that in a Venn diagram, this middle section represents what they have in common, their similarities. So you could also label this section both. There are a lot of similarities between animal cells and plant cells. Now, if you'd like to give this a try, potentially pause the video and see what organelles can you fill in this Venn diagram. I'll show you what I came up with now. They both share that they have a cell membrane. Both animal and plant cells have cytoplasm. They both have mitochondria. They both have a nucleus. They both have a nuclear membrane. And they both have an ER, or endoplasmic reticulum. Now, let's think about specifically just plant cells. Just plant cells have a cell wall. Just plant cells have chloroplasts. Just plant cells have a large vacuole. And just plant cells have a rectangular shape. Animal cells, on the other hand, only have small vacuoles. They also only have a round shape. This Venn diagram will be a pretty helpful resource for you as we continue to do more work with an animal cell and plant cell. The last thing I'd recommend, 6th graders, if you haven't done so already, I'd consider drawing both an animal cell and a plant cell in your notes. Again, perhaps you pause the video here and use my drawings as some inspiration. So my animal cell has 7 labeled organelles, and my plant cell has 9 labeled organelles, 2 additional ones. Those are the cell wall, which I underlined, and the chloroplasts. Okay? Awesome. I hope that this video helped your understanding of plant cells, specifically animal cells versus plant cells, and now you feel prepared to do the rest of your asynchronous activity. Work hard. Email me if you have questions.